Yes. Give me one of those, right? Unless they stop somewhere halfway, then we may have a third state. What's he doing on the internet? This is probably one of the greatest areas of legal exposure for dealers today, and also one of the greatest areas of confusion, which is why I use the bookstore example. Not the most computer savvy person, but I've yet to be able to figure out which button LJ I hit on the computer printer to get a car to print out. You can't do that. The car won't come out of the printer and UPS won't deliver it to your front door. So is he selling a car on the internet? Anybody? Then why do we have all these awards being given out for internet sales? If no one has sold a car on the internet, how can you do that? Do you know anyone that has sold a car on the internet? How do you do that? It's very difficult to do that. How do you have the paperwork signed on the internet? How do you sign an odometer statement in cyberspace? How do you sign a power of attorney in cyberspace? You don't do that. So what are you doing? Which is, and your question was crafted in a very clever fashion. Keith, I can't sell it online, which is what you recognize. You're getting information from a customer online. The customer maybe finds your vehicle because you've got a well-crafted website, and they come and they see a car and say, I would like to buy that. And I happen to be in a different state. Now what happens? Now you've got people from the Bureau of Motor Vehicles that would remind you, you can't sell a car away from your licensed location. So therefore you've got to sell it at your licensed location. You can't just go to a kitchen table over in Indianapolis and sit down and sell a car. So you've got to sell it at your licensed location. Now there's no real requirement the customer has to get in a car and drive there, but you can't sell away from your licensed location. So what happens? You don't put the paperwork in the glove box, drive the car over to Indiana and say, here, sign it up, we're done. What you might be doing is getting paperwork to a customer. Best case scenario, you've got paperwork somehow going to the customer to write up, here's what I would like to do, and the customer making an offer that comes back to your dealership for you to then be able to say, yes, I'll accept the offer at the store, process everything, and then be able to send a car out. In some states, even that could be an issue because you cannot engage in activity away from a licensed location. What happens if, in fact, you do just say, as happened recently, we'll just load the car up. I'm going to take my salesperson, Jim, hop in the car, drive to Indiana, sit down at the kitchen table, and we're going to sell the car to Kyle. And you do that. What has happened? And you sold it in Indiana. And depending upon how the paperwork is structured, and we just had a case decision like this in Ohio, with the converse, the Indiana dealer coming to a customer in Ohio and sitting down at the kitchen table and having language in the purchase agreement that probably shouldn't have been there that says the laws of the state where the paperwork is executed control, they sold the car in Ohio, so therefore they have to comply with which state's laws? Mr. Coleman, since I'm licensed in your state, would you think I have to comply with your laws as well? Yeah. So that dealer's in Indiana. Do you think the Indiana DMV thinks they have to comply with their laws? Yes. But he sold the car in Ohio. That's where the transaction occurred. So, and the contract says Ohio law applies. So which law applies to the transaction? Ohio law, and I'm licensed under Indiana law, so therefore which law applies? You've got both applying, you've got a real mess. In that particular case, the dealership wound up getting sued in Ohio and was subject to suit here because of the paperwork and how they did the transaction. We've got a real problem with the internet, don't we? Somebody needs to figure this out because it's a great advertising and marketing mechanism to be able to go through and do. You know very well the thing the internet offers in particular to a smaller dealer is on that web page, you can look as nice and as big and sophisticated as anybody. It's just a web page. So it's a great way to level the playing field from a marketing and advertising point of view. It's not costly and the consumers are able to find you. The question then is what happens in the transaction? We spent a lot of time earlier talking about paperwork, correct? If I've got all this paperwork put together and you're selling cars, how are you set up to sell cars today with customers coming into your dealership? So let's assume for a moment that we somehow can modify that and we've got paperwork going somewhere to be able to handle this transaction. You're designed to sell cars, every one of you have. Someone at my dealership. If I'm allowed somehow to do it away from the store in some fashion, knowing that I can't sell away from my licensed location, I have to modify paperwork, don't I? If I'm not financing it myself, what's the other variable? I have to comply with a lender agreement with respect of all this. How do I verify identity? How do I do all the other things? So you really have to engage in the whole internet transactions area at your own peril. Someone's going to have to put some effort into this thing and figure out how it's going to apply to the motor vehicle industry. Right now what happens, if you're doing nothing more than advertising and marketing, maybe getting some information from a customer, perhaps pulling a credit application online, maybe even taking a deposit to be able to have a customer come to your dealership, you're in pretty good shape. When you start venturing beyond that, you've got to be concerned depending on the jurisdiction you're in upon state licensing laws, the Motor Vehicle Code, the Consumer Act, modifying your paperwork, and lender agreements. But an excellent question, and one if you can figure out, you'll find in most dealerships that it will generate additional sales and profitability for the store.
Keith, we have